Welcome to the channel. An amazing unsolved mystery has occurred in Brazil. In the evening of August 1966, on the slopes of Vintema Hill near bustling Rio de Janeiro, two passers-by made a chilling discovery. Among the tall grass lay the bodies of two men, neatly dressed in formal suits and raincoats. Their faces were hidden by strange lead masks, hand-cut from sheet metal. The scene was accompanied only by an empty bottle, two damp towels, and a notebook with a cryptic note. 1630, be at the location. 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal. Mask. What was it? A ritual? A mistake? Or a carefully planned encounter with the unknown? Investigators quickly identified the deceased as Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, electronics technicians from the small town of Campos dos Goitacazes. Friends, enthusiasts of the science of the spirit, members of a circle calling themselves spiritual scientists. According to acquaintances, they had long dreamed of contacting higher powers, possibly even extraterrestrials. But what led them to this hill? Why wear lead masks that offered no protection from rain and through which they could not see? Perhaps they served only one purpose, to shield their eyes from a bright, blinding light. And indeed, on the same night, witnesses reported a glowing, fiery orange sphere hovering above Vintema. A coincidence? Or evidence of a meeting with an otherworldly intelligence? However, there is a more prosaic theory. A few days before their deaths, the men had withdrawn a large sum of money from their account, which was never recovered. Perhaps they fell victim to a deception, forced to ingest poison capsules while their killers took the money. Yet the notebook itself, the mysterious instructions, and the masks remain a stumbling block for all explanations. Why protect metals? Why at the specified time? And what was the signal they were waiting for? There are still no answers. The story of the lead masks is a story of belief in the unknown, of people willing to risk everything for a mystery that may have proven fatal. Vintema Hill still keeps its silence. But if you climb to its summit, it seems the wind whispers that very secret, the secret of two men whose eyes are forever hidden behind lead masks. The 1960s. The world was changing faster than ever before. In the United States, people were preparing for the moon landing, in Europe, student protests were erupting, and in Latin America, revolutions were followed by dictatorships. Brazil, at this time, lived in contrasts. On one hand, there was industrialization, new factories, bustling cities, and railways. On the other hand, there was poverty, slums, and the destitute clinging to hope in a world where the rich grew richer and the poor were left behind. A special place in this picture was Rio de Janeiro, a city that seemed to embody everything at once: the glow of tropical sun and the shadow of criminal neighborhoods, the luxury of resort beaches and the harshness of the favelas. It drew tourists and dreamers, criminals, mystics, and adventurers alike. Just a few kilometers from Rio, across Guanabara Bay, lay the city of Niterói. Today, it is a lively urban center, but in the mid-20th century, it was a place where industrial slums coexisted with rare green hills. One of these hills, Vintema, became part of a legend that still both terrifies and fascinates seekers of the mysterious. For the locals, Vintema Hill was nothing extraordinary. Tall grass, tropical trees, slopes offering views of the bay. Shepherds grazed their cattle here, children flew kites, and lovers sought seclusion. Yet the hill had one peculiar trait: in the evenings, a strange, almost mystical silence always reigned. The wind seemed to muffle its own gusts, and the city's sounds faded into the dense greenery. It was in this silence, in August 1966, that an event occurred which shook all of Brazil. The evening was hot and humid one though winter by the calendar, the sun blazed as if on the equator. After days of rain, the clouds parted, and the city was bathed in a sticky haze. On the slopes of Vintema, a boy was playing. He ran through the tall grass, sending a paper kite soaring into the sky. His laughter carried far, and the wind lifted the kite ever higher. But suddenly, as he tugged on the string, the boy noticed a strange dark patch in the grass. It stood out from the familiar landscape. Approaching, he saw clothing. At first, he thought someone had discarded old suits. But as he leaned closer, his heart sank. There were people in the suits. Two men, motionless, their bodies already beginning to decompose under the sun. And the most horrifying thing, their faces. They were covered with strange homemade lead masks, roughly cut as if with metal shears. The masks covered only the eyes, had no straps, and seemed designed not for protection, but for some ritual. Terrified, the boy ran home, and soon the police climbed the hill. The scene that investigators encountered seemed ripped from a nightmare. Two men lay side by side, dressed neatly in suits and raincoats. Nearby were an empty water bottle and two damp towels. In their pockets were notes with incomprehensible codes and strange instructions. 1630, be at the location. At 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal. Mask. The bodies showed no signs of struggle. No weapons. No money, no documents. Only a mystery. Who were these men? Why did they wear lead masks? What capsules had they taken? And what signal were they waiting for? Thus began one of the most mystical and grim stories of the 20th century, the mystery of the lead masks on Vintema Hill. It was August 1966. A hot evening over Niterói, the air heavy after days of rain. Water evaporated from the streets, turning the city into a steaming sauna. People stayed indoors, closed their windows, but the humidity seeped everywhere. On the hilltops, a light breeze offered rare relief from the heat. It was there, on Vintema Hill, that a boy named Jorge climbed to fly his kite. He came here often. The grass was tall, the space open, and from the height, the ocean winds lifted his kite effortlessly. Jorge ran across the slope, laughing, watching the sky. But suddenly, as he tugged the string, he noticed something strange. A dark patch appeared in the grass ahead, as if the earth had been pressed down. The boy froze. Approaching, he made out the outline of fabric. At first, it seemed like someone had left old clothes. But the smell came before understanding, sweet, putrid, thick, nauseating. Drawing closer, he saw what he would never forget. Two bodies. The men lay side by side, motionless, as if asleep. They wore formal suits, with raincoats over them. Their faces were covered with strange objects, lead masks, roughly cut from sheets of metal, with no straps, covering only their eyes. At first, Jorge could not believe his eyes. He wanted to run, but something compelled him to look closer. Nearby lay an empty bottle, folded towels, and the grass around them was pressed down, as if they had lain there voluntarily, waiting for something. Jorge screamed, dropped his kite, and ran down to his mother. His words were disjointed, but one thing was clear: there were dead people on the hill. When the first police officers arrived, the sun was already setting. The humid air glowed red, and the very atmosphere seemed to hint that something sinister had occurred. Pushing through the grass, the officers were hit by the same stench of decay. They found the bodies. And although the police had seen death countless times, this scene baffled them. 2 adult men. Suits and raincoats. No signs of struggle, violence, or blood. Items arranged neatly around them: bottle, towels. And those lead masks covering their eyes. One investigator later told journalists, it looked as if they had voluntarily prepared for something. Not murder. Not a conventional suicide. Some strange ritual. The police decided to leave guards at the scene and wait for morning. The night on the hill was oppressive and uneasy. Dogs howled below, and the guards reported feeling as if they were being watched. In the morning, on August 21st, firefighters, doctors, and reporters climbed Vintema Hill. The full picture emerged. In the pockets of the raincoats were receipts for purchases, a small amount of cash, and a notebook. The notebook contained sets of letters and numbers resembling codes. But most importantly, the instructions. Neatly written, in simple words, like a to-do list: 1630, be at the location, 1830, ingest capsules, after the effect, protect metals. Await signal. Mask. The doctors noted that the bodies had been there for several days. The heat had accelerated decomposition, meaning the men had died shortly after they were last seen alive. But what had happened? Where were the capsules? And why the masks? The news spread across Brazil instantly. Newspapers wrote of a mysterious death on the hill, comparing the discovery to scenes from fantastic novels. Some called it a monstrous crime, others a spiritualist ritual. Neighbors of the boy who had found the bodies reported seeing a strange light above the hill that night. It was like a glowing sphere hovering over the grass, one woman recalled. The police, however, looked at it pragmatically. They found no money on the deceased. Yet bank records showed that shortly before their trip, they had withdrawn a large sum. Someone could have deceived and robbed them. Still, even the most skeptical officers could not explain, why the masks? Why the instructions? And what signal were they waiting for? This discovery was only the beginning. Soon it became clear that the deceased were far from ordinary people. They had secret interests, dreamed of contacting higher powers, and perhaps had walked willingly toward their own deaths. Their names: Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana. 2 names that for their neighbors were part of everyday life, but for history became symbols of mystery. They lived in the town of Campos dos Goitacazes, in the state of Rio de Janeiro. An industrial center, a city of oil workers and factory laborers. Life there moved at a steady pace: noisy markets, narrow streets, working-class neighborhoods, football matches on weekends. Manuel and Miguel had been friends for a long time. Both were electronics technicians, a respected trade in a time when being able to repair radios, televisions, and electrical appliances was highly valued. Polite, serious, and modest, no one could say a bad word about them. They had families, loved ones, a seemingly ordinary life. But beneath this ordinary facade lay another side, a fascination with science that bordered on mysticism. Manuel and Miguel were part of a small group of enthusiasts who called themselves spiritual scientists. These people believed that beyond the familiar world, another level of reality existed, and that science and spiritual practices could help access it. They were interested in everything: spiritualism, parapsychology, contact with other civilizations. They met in the evenings, discussing hypotheses, sharing articles from newspapers and magazines. The group paid particular attention to building electronic devices to communicate with higher intelligences. Some considered it a mad endeavor, but for them, it was akin to religion. They believed that through radio waves, electrical impulses, and special devices, it was possible to hear voices, perhaps spirits or even beings from other worlds. It was said that during one of their experiments, an explosion occurred. A faulty device assembly ended with a loud bang and a small fire. Neighbors recalled the house filling with acrid smoke, and miraculously, no one was hurt. After this incident, the group became more cautious. But Manuel and Miguel did not abandon their quest. They were obsessed. Some said their eyes burned with intensity when speaking of signals, as if they already knew contact was possible, they just had to prepare properly. Manuel was married. His wife later recalled that he told her he was going on a business trip, providing no details. Miguel was not alone either, he had a fiancée. Before leaving, he promised to return in a few days. In her memory, he seemed tense, as if carrying out an important mission. Both men took with them large sums of money, significant amounts for those times. They promised their loved ones they would return soon. Instead, their journey ended on Vintema Hill. One could say they were merely naive dreamers, believing in the possibility of contact with another intelligence. Yet there was method in their obsession. They prepared meticulously, discussed details, and wrote instructions. Witnesses from their group later claimed, yes, they were planning an important experiment. But what exactly it involved, no one knew. And when the bodies were found on the hill, many recalled, this could have been the execution of a long-standing plan. Masks, notes, waiting for a signal, it all looked like part of a carefully orchestrated scenario. The lives of these two men offered no hint that they would end up in the newspapers. They were ordinary citizens of 1960s Brazil. Yet they became the protagonists of one of the darkest and most incomprehensible mysteries of the 20th century. It was August 17, 1966. Morning in Campos dos Goitacazes began as usual, the market bustling, the smell of fresh bread, people rushing about their business. No one could have guessed that on this day, two local technicians would take a step that would forever immortalize their names in Brazilian mystique. Manuel Pereira de Cruz told his wife he was going on a business trip. Miguel José Viana assured his fiancée he would be away only a few days. They gathered their money, a considerable sum withdrawn from their accounts. Neither explained the purpose of the trip to their loved ones. Around noon, they boarded a bus to Niterói. The journey lasted several hours, passing through green fields, hills, sugarcane plantations, and small villages. Both men appeared focused, almost silent. Other passengers later recalled that they were not relaxed tourists, but people who seemed to know that an important trial awaited them. By evening, they arrived in Niterói. The city was alive, the streets noisy, trams clattering, lights sparkling in the harbor. First, they went to an electronics shop, buying a few small radio components. The shopkeeper remembered them as polite, yet clearly in a hurry. Next, they went to a clothing store and purchased 2 identical raincoats. The weather was dry, no rain was expected. Why they needed these coats remains a mystery to this day. At 9 p.m., they entered a small cafe on the outskirts. The waitress remembered them particularly well. 2 men in suits, clearly not locals, looked tense. They ordered only mineral water. No food, no alcohol. Miguel pulled a note from his pocket, checked the time, and glanced at his watch. His hands trembled slightly. The waitress later recalled. They looked as if they were waiting. Like people who know that in a few hours something very important is going to happen. They paid and left quickly. On the way to the hill, several other witnesses saw them. One local, a jeep driver, said he had given them a lift part of the way. The men asked to be dropped at the base of Vintema Hill. Their bags were light. They thanked him and walked up the hill. It was around 4 p.m. Later, a line in one of their notes was discovered, 16:30, be at the location. Coincidence? The subsequent events can only be reconstructed. They climbed the hill, spread out towels, and opened a bottle of water. Everything suggested they were waiting for someone, or something. At 6:30 p.m., according to their own notes, they were supposed to take capsules. But what were these capsules? Pills? Powder? Psychoactive substances? Poison? To this day, the answer remains unknown. Next, protect metals. Perhaps this referred to the lead from which the masks were made, or to other objects they intended to use in the experiment. The final instruction was the most enigmatic, a wait signal. Mask. A signal, from whom? From the heavens? From a device? From other participants who never appeared? From this moment on, everything is shrouded in mystery. At some point, their hearts stopped beating. The cause of death was never determined. The official autopsy yielded no clarity, the bodies had decomposed too quickly. One thing is certain, after that moment, no one ever saw them alive again. Only days later did the boy with the kite stumble upon their remains. The lead masks. This detail stunned the police, journalists, and anyone who heard the story. The masks were roughly cut from sheets of lead, the same material often used in radio engineering or for radiation protection. They didn't cover the face fully, only the eyes. They had no straps or fastenings, just 2 plates bent so they could be pressed against the face. Why? The simplest theory, they were a kind of goggles. Perhaps the men expected a flash of blinding light. Maybe they believed they would witness a phenomenon, supernatural or scientific, accompanied by a glow. And indeed, that night, residents of Niteroi reported seeing a fiery sphere in the sky. Witnesses described it as a strange glow hovering over the hill. If Manuel and Miguel believed contact was possible, the masks could have been their protection against the light. But lead is a special metal. In alchemy, it symbolizes weight, darkness, and the transition to transformation. It is the metal of Saturn, associated with the mysteries of time and death. To cover one's eyes with lead is to voluntarily withdraw from the visible world, to shield vision from earthly reality, preparing to encounter another level of existence. For the spiritual scientists, the mask may have been more than a utilitarian object, it could have been a symbol of transition, a kind of key to contact the unseen. Some researchers believe the masks were made for radiation protection. In those years, radio technology, electrical impulses, and waves were considered almost magical, and people might have thought that contact with higher intelligences would be accompanied by radiation. Lead is indeed used to shield against radiation. Even in its primitive form, to them it may have seemed logical. The note found with the bodies raised no fewer questions. It contained the following lines. 1630, be at the location, 1830, take capsules, after the effect, protect metals, await signal. Mask. At first glance, it looks like a simple to-do list. But each line conceals a mystery. 1630, be at the location, this time matches when they were last seen alive. Punctuality indicates a plan. 1830, take capsules, what were these capsules? Psychoactive drugs. Sleeping pills. Poison. No capsules were found. Perhaps their bodies decomposed so quickly that no trace remained. After the effect, protect metals, which metals? The lead masks. Their instruments. Or is this a mystical language in which metals symbolize the human body as a vessel? Await signal. Mask, the most ominous line. Await what? A signal from the sky. A signal from the device. A signal from other participants in the experiment who never arrived. And mask, a reminder that at the moment of the signal, their eyes must be protected. This was not the first such case. 2 years earlier, another technician had been found dead in the same region, also wearing a lead mask. Official reports about this incident are scarce, but rumors persisted. Could this have been a chain of experiments? Or the work of the same cult? The discovery can be interpreted in different ways. Skeptics argue, 2 naive people believed in the possibility of an experiment, ingested an unknown substance, and died from poisoning. Everything else is coincidence. But those inclined toward mysticism see a different meaning. They are convinced that Manuel and Miguel were preparing for contact. They knew they had to wear the masks and wait for the signal. And perhaps, they received it, but we will never know what that signal was. The picture grows increasingly enigmatic. Masks, the note, the strange disappearance of money, witnesses seeing glowing spheres in the sky, all of it forms a dark puzzle, where every explanation only raises more questions. The story of the lead masks is like a dark labyrinth. Every turn seems to lead to an answer, yet instead opens a new door, behind which lie even more questions. After the bodies were found, the police and journalists tried to piece together the scene. But the longer they investigated, the more incredible the theories became. One theory emerged almost immediately. On the day the 2 technicians died, residents of Niteroi reported a strange phenomenon. Over the Vintema Hill, a bright glow was seen, a fiery sphere, suspended in the air. The masks, the note, and the capsules looked like preparations for a contact. The group that included Manuel and Miguel called themselves spiritual scientists. They were indeed conducting experiments in attempts to connect with other forces. Supporters of this theory believe the capsules were some kind of mind-tuning substance, intended to facilitate contact. The masks, in turn, were meant to protect them from the light of a ship or other energetic phenomenon. In their view, death was not accidental. It could have been a transition, the bodies remained on the hill, but consciousness moved beyond. A more rational hypothesis suggests that they may have prepared the substance themselves, which led to the tragedy. It is known that Manuel and Miguel were fascinated by electronics and chemistry. Perhaps they experimented with psychoactive or even toxic substances. The note could have been their protocol: take the capsules, wait for the effect, put on the masks. But the substance turned out to be deadly. Doctors could not determine the cause of death due to the rapid decomposition of the organs. Brazil in the 1960s was not only a period of industrialization but also a flourishing of spiritism, mystical cults, and secret societies. Some researchers are convinced that Manuel and Miguel became victims of a ritual. The lead masks could symbolize closing one's eyes to the earthly world. The capsules, a ritual tool to separate the soul from the body. Protect metals, a phrase that might have an esoteric meaning, understood only by the initiated. In this interpretation, the tragedy was the result of fanatical faith in mysticism pushed to its extreme. Another theory: murder and robbery. This is the most prosaic, yet the most logical explanation. Manuel and Miguel withdrew a large sum of money, about 3 million cruzeiros. The money was never found on them. Witnesses saw the men with unknown companions, traveling by jeep toward the hill. No capsules, no poison, no fight was found, only the note. Perhaps they were lured by the promise of an experiment or contact, given capsules, poison, and after death, their money and valuables were taken. Supporting this theory is the fact that a few years earlier, another technician was found dead under similar circumstances, with a lead mask. This could have been the signature of the same group of criminals or murderers. A third version: mass hallucination and mythology. Skeptics claim the story of the fiery sphere may have been a product of imagination or journalistic sensationalism. The masks were simply homemade items without any mysterious significance. The note, banal reminders, later interpreted as mystical instructions. In this version, the tragedy is explained as simple poisoning and the death of two trusting men, but it was the media and public perception that turned it into a story of the occult. Which version is more likely? UFO contact is dramatic and compelling, but the evidence is thin. Some kind of experiment seems plausible: the men were fascinated with technology and could have made a mistake. A strange ritual? That fits the cultural context of Brazil, where mystical groups were common. Or perhaps robbery. That explains the missing money and the suspicious behavior of unknown individuals. Yet none of these versions provides a definitive answer. Each adds another layer to this dark story. To understand the story of the lead masks, one must immerse themselves in 1960s Brazil, a country of contrasts. At this time, Rio de Janeiro and surrounding cities, Niterói, Campos dos Goitacazes, were experiencing rapid growth, industry, construction, a new rhythm of life. People pursued material prosperity, but beneath the surface existed deep cultural layers: spiritism, mystical cults, belief in the supernatural. The group to which Manuel and Miguel belonged called themselves spiritual scientists. They believed that science and spirituality were not contradictory but could together lead to higher truths. They experimented with radio devices, electronics, and chemicals, seeking ways to contact other civilizations or higher intelligences. To them, no boundary existed between the physical and the metaphysical. From this perspective, the masks, the note, and the capsules were both ritual and technological tools, blending science and mysticism. Lead was no ordinary metal. In alchemy and esotericism, it symbolizes heaviness, the earthly principle, transition from the material to the spiritual, and protection from unwanted influences, such as light or energy. The masks covered the eyes, as if shielding the human world from the other world. Perhaps for Manuel and Miguel, this was a ritual of preparation for revelation, a moment when consciousness was meant to separate from the body. Their notes may have been a code, understandable only to the initiated, those who knew what it meant to protect the metals, or what signal to wait for. In this way, the note connects everyday logic with esoteric meaning, creating an aura of mystique. Brazil has always been a country where the mystical coexists with the rational. Cities thrived with industry, yet deep within society, spiritism persisted. People believed that the spirits of the dead could communicate with the living. The appearance of unexplained phenomena was often interpreted through this lens. That is why the story of the two technicians found with lead masks could not go unnoticed. For contemporaries, this was not merely a death, it was a manifestation of mysticism and mystery woven into daily life. The story of Manuel and Miguel is an example of how science and belief can intertwine, creating dangerous but alluring scenarios. They were technically skilled, knowledgeable in electronics, yet they also believed in the supernatural. Their actions on Vintema Hill were a mix of experiment and ritual. The deaths of these two men became a symbol of the fragile boundary between reason and faith, where ordinary logic ceases to function. After the discovery of the bodies on Vintema Hill, the world of Niterói was shaken. The boy with the kite, who stumbled upon the remains, did not comprehend the scale of the event. He simply saw something strange in the grass and ran home. His parents called the police. When officers arrived, the hill already seemed a place not only of tragedy but also of mystery. Due to the hill's uneven terrain and the darkness, the bodies could not be examined immediately. On the morning of August 21st, police and firefighters returned. The scene: two bodies in suits, raincoats, lead masks, a water bottle, towels, with metallic objects, or protected metals, on them. The investigators' first thoughts: murder or accident. The bodies were sent for autopsy, but due to the coroner's workload, the examination was delayed by several weeks. By the time it occurred, the internal organs had decomposed, leaving the exact cause of death unknown. Officially, it was impossible to determine how Manuel and Miguel died. The police studied the instruction note, the lead masks, the capsules, which could not be identified, clothing, and personal items. A large sum of money withdrawn from their bank accounts was never recovered after the tragedy. Investigators attempted to reconstruct the men's last days, interviewing witnesses in Niterói, who saw them in the bar, who gave them a ride in a jeep, what purchases they made. Initial hypotheses suggested the men were lured to the hill, given capsules, possibly poison, and then robbed. Supporting evidence: the missing money, and the strange behavior of unknown individuals in the jeep. Another possibility: an accidental experiment. The technicians may have made a mistake with the substances they themselves consumed. Their fascination with spiritual science explains the masks and the instructions. Perhaps it was UFO contact or a mystical ritual. Witnesses reported seeing a bright fiery sphere above the hill. In this interpretation, the lead masks and capsules were ritualistic props. The story spread quickly in the newspapers. Residents of Niterói and nearby towns debated who the men were and why they climbed the hill. For many, it was a shock. Ordinary technical specialists had become the protagonists of a strange mystical drama. Rumors circulated about spiritual experiments and encounters with other entities. Journalists called it the most mysterious death in Brazil in recent years. Since then, the tragedy of Manuel and Miguel became a legend. The story inspired research, books, documentaries, and online discussions. It demonstrates how science, faith, and human naivety can intertwine in a tragedy. Every version of events raises more questions than answers. Witnesses also noted mystical elements and possible UFO sightings that night. The night of August 20, 1966, over Vintema Hill was unusual. Witnesses recalled the air was heavy, yet carried a strange energy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. On this night, Manuel and Miguel ascended the hill with capsules, masks, and the enigmatic note. Some locals later reported a strange phenomenon: a fiery orange sphere hovered over the hill. It made no sound, floated smoothly in the air, and then suddenly vanished. The timing coincides with the moment the men took the capsules and put on the masks. Supporters of the extraterrestrial contact theory believe the object may have been the source of the signal mentioned in their note. According to mystical hypotheses, the masks were meant to protect their eyes from the intense light of the UFO. Their primitive construction suggests they were worn briefly, precisely at the moment that glowing sphere appeared. Skeptics see coincidence, while esotericists perceive symbolic meaning, separating consciousness from the body and transitioning to another state. Friends of Manuel and Miguel from the same spiritual scientists group stated that the men sought to synthesize science and mysticism. They built devices for contact with higher entities, striving for the exit of consciousness beyond the human body. Masks, capsules, and instructions were elements of a ritual, a form of technical spiritism. They believed that preparation could allow entry into a state of higher knowledge and eternal consciousness. On the hill, only the bodies, masks, and a water bottle were found. Money and personal belongings disappeared. The capsules were never identified. Every detail reinforces the sense of mystique and the unexplainable. Why lead masks? Where did the money go? What signal were the men waiting for? Was the fiery sphere a real UFO or a witness hallucination? Events on Vintema Hill quickly became legendary. Newspapers called it one of the most mysterious deaths of the decade. Journalists, researchers, and paranormal enthusiasts discussed possible contact with extraterrestrials. In Brazil's cultural context, this intensified interest in spiritism, mystical experiments, and unexplained phenomena. The case of Manuel and Miguel became a symbol of how human curiosity and belief can collide with the unknown, producing both tragedy and legend. Although mystical and extraterrestrial hypotheses captivate the imagination, many researchers argue that the Vintema Hill tragedy has a more prosaic explanation. One of the first points that attracted skeptics' attention was the disappearance of 3 million cruzeiros withdrawn by the men before their trip to Niterói. Skeptics argue this is a direct sign of a robbery. The missing money indicates that someone likely lured the men to the hill. This also explains their strange behavior in the bar. Miguel's nervousness could have been a reaction to the presence of third parties. No capsules were found on site. Perhaps the men had ingested them beforehand. They could have contained poison or a potent drug causing rapid death. A rational version: the capsules were part of a scam, promising a mystical experience or contact with higher powers. The lead masks, skeptics see them as symbolic or incidental items. Perhaps the men brought the masks themselves for the ritual or as an experimental element. Their shape and material indicate they were not intended for long wear and could not realistically protect from light or radiation. The men arrived in Niteroi, bought raincoats, and headed to the hill. The last sighting of them was in the company of other people, possibly involved in the staged experiment. The subsequent events, taking the capsules, putting on the masks, dying, were likely caused by poisoning or the effects of psychoactive substances. Why does the story remain a mystery? No one knows exactly what the capsules contained. The note remains only partially deciphered. The witness of the mystical fiery sphere was a single individual. The missing money and belongings were never recovered. These gaps fuel the legend, blending rational and mystical interpretations. The deaths of Manuel and Miguel on Vintema Hill in 1966 left an indelible mark not only on Niteroi but on all of Brazil. The story quickly transcended newspapers, becoming the legend of the lead masks. Brazilian writers and artists were inspired by the Vintema mystery. Stories of the lead masks became plots for mystical tales, novels, and comics. Artists depicted mystical scenes with masks and the fiery sphere, emphasizing the duality of science and magic. This story became a symbol of how mysticism and science can intertwine in the collective consciousness, creating a legend that endures for decades. It shows how a single strange event can unite science, belief, and mysticism, remaining an unsolved mystery for future generations. Manuel and Miguel were not just technicians and engineers, they were explorers of spirit and consciousness. They believed that science and mysticism did not contradict one another. Their spiritual scientists group tried to merge technology with esotericism. The desire to explore invisible worlds could outweigh natural fear of danger. For them, Vintema Hill was a place to encounter the unknown, to touch something greater than everyday reality. The story demonstrates how human trust can become dangerous. They relied on their friends and colleagues, following instructions as ritual or scientific protocol. Without fully understanding the consequences of the capsules and masks, they followed the plan to the end. Their faith and curiosity made them vulnerable to mistakes or possibly malevolent intentions from others. Brazil in the 1960s was a period of spiritual and mystical renaissance, spiritism, esoteric groups, interest in contact with other worlds. The social environment supported belief in the supernatural as part of life, not as an exception. This cultural backdrop explains why the men may have perceived the strange instructions as normal. On Vintema Hill, they met their tragic fate. The masks closed their eyes, shielding them from the earthly world. The capsules completed a process whose consequences could not be foreseen. Their bodies remained in the grass of the hill, while their spirits live on in the legend. The story of the lead masks remains a bridge between science and mysticism, logic and faith, the rational and the inexplicable. Manuel and Miguel left this world, but their story continues to inspire researchers, writers, and lovers of the mystical, creating a legend without end.